Weakness is not a condition you were born with. Weakness is a habit you have been practicing. Every excuse you make, every compromise you break, every standard you lower, every external limit you accept, every defeat that paralyzes you. These are not inevitable failures, they are choices. Choices that have built the weak version of yourself, one compromise at a time. But discipline is the destroyer of that weakness. Discipline is the daily practice of keeping promises to yourself until keeping promises becomes who you are. This audiobook will show you how to silence excuses, master consistency, and rebuild yourself into someone unshakable, not through motivation or inspiration, but through the systematic destruction of all the weak habits that have kept you small. Everything else is just talk. Chapter 1. Weakness is a choice you keep making. You're weak, not because of your genetics, not because of your circumstances, not because life dealt you a bad hand. You are weak because you have been choosing weakness. Every single day, hundreds of times per day, thousands of times per year, you have been practicing weakness so consistently, so repetitively, so thoroughly that weakness has become who you are. And until you accept that weakness is not a condition but a choice, you will never build the strength to destroy it. Here is the uncomfortable truth about weakness. Weakness is not something that happens to you. Weakness is the accumulated result of thousands of small choices where you prioritized comfort over growth, immediate relief over long-term strength, and excuses over execution. Every time you hit snooze instead of getting up, every time you skip the workout instead of training, every time you choose the easy path instead of the necessary path, every time you avoid the difficult conversation instead of having it, you are choosing weakness. You are voting for weakness. You're building weakness. That is the key. Weakness is not passive. Weakness is active. Weakness is something you're doing, something you are creating, something you are reinforcing every single day through your choices. And the reason you have not changed is not because change is impossible. The reason you have not changed is because you keep choosing weakness. You have a choice. You can continue blaming your weakness on circumstances, genetics, bad luck, or unfair conditions. Or you can accept that weakness is the result of your choices and start making different choices. But you cannot do both. And right now, your refusal to accept responsibility for your weakness is the main thing keeping you weak. Think about yesterday. How many times did you choose weakness? The alarm went off, and you chose to hit snooze instead of getting up. That was a choice for weakness. You had work to do, and you chose to scroll instead of working. That was a choice for weakness. You knew you should train, and you chose to skip it. That was a choice for weakness. You should have had a difficult conversation, and you chose to avoid it. That was a choice for weakness. How many times? 10? 20? 50? Each one was a vote for the weak version of yourself. And here's the problem. You do not think those choices matter. You think one snooze does not count. One skipped workout is not a big deal. One avoided conversation is understandable. One distraction is harmless. And you are right. One choice does not matter. But you are not making one choice. You are making dozens of choices for weakness every single day. And those choices compound. They accumulate. They build the identity of someone who is weak, someone who compromises, someone who makes excuses, someone who chooses comfort over growth. It is not about blame. It is not about shame. It is about recognition. You need to see clearly that weakness is not happening to you. Weakness is something you are actively creating through your daily choices. And once you see that clearly, once you accept that completely, then change becomes possible. Because if weakness is a choice, strength is also a choice. If you built weakness through thousands of weak choices, you can build strength through thousands of strong choices. But first you have to stop pretending weakness is something beyond your control. Here is how every excuse reinforces weakness. Each time you justify why you cannot do something, why conditions are not right, or why you'll start later, you're not just avoiding the task. You are practicing the identity of someone who makes excuses. You're strengthening the neural pathways that produce excuses. You're becoming more skilled at excuse making. And excuse making is a skill you have been perfecting for years. Think about how good you are at making excuses, how quickly they come, how convincing they sound, how reasonable they feel. That fluency is not natural. That fluency is trained. You have practiced excuse-making so many times that it has become automatic. Someone suggests you wake up early and instantly you have 10 reasons why that will not work for you. Someone suggests you train and immediately you have 5 reasons why today is not the day. Someone suggests you start the difficult project and without thinking you generate 3 reasons why you need to wait. That is not weakness. That is expertise. You have become an expert at producing excuses. And every time you produce an excuse, every time you justify an action, every time you explain why you cannot, you are practicing that expertise. You are making excuse-making easier. You are making weakness more automatic. You are building the identity of someone who always has a reason why not. You have a choice. You can continue practicing excuse-making and becoming more skilled at justifying weakness. Or you can start recognizing excuses for what they are and refusing to produce them. One approach makes weakness permanent. The other approach makes strength possible. Here is the protocol. Starting today, you notice every excuse. You do not judge it. You do not fight it. You just notice it. The alarm goes off and your mind produces a reason to hit snooze. Notice that. Notice that your brain just generated an excuse. The workout time arrives and your mind produces a reason to skip it. Notice that. Notice that excuse-making is happening. The difficult task appears and your mind produces a reason to delay. Notice that. Notice the pattern. Because you cannot change what you do not see. And right now you're probably not seeing how often you make excuses. You have been making them so automatically for so long that they feel like truth instead of choice. But they are not truth. They are choices. Choices to reinforce weakness. And noticing them is the first step to stopping them. That is the key. Awareness precedes change. You cannot stop choosing weakness until you see that you're choosing weakness. You cannot stop making excuses until you recognize excuse-making as it happens. You cannot build strength until you understand how you have been building weakness. So you notice, you observe, you watch yourself choose weakness dozens of times per day. And in that watching, in that noticing, change becomes possible. Here are the daily choices that build or destroy you. Between the moment you wake and the moment you sleep, you make hundreds of micro-choices. Choices that seem insignificant in isolation, but compound into everything in aggregate. The alarm sounds. Do you get up or hit snooze? Weakness or strength? The workout time arrives. Do you train or skip? Weakness or strength? The work needs to be done. Do you focus or distract? Weakness or strength? The difficult conversation needs to happen. Do you have it or avoid it? Weakness or strength? Every single micro-choice is a vote. A vote for the person you are becoming. And you become whoever gets the most votes. If you vote for weakness 50 times today and strength 5 times today, you are building weakness. If you vote for weakness 300 times this week and strength 30 times this week, you are building weakness. The math is simple. The majority of your choices determines your identity. And right now, the majority of your choices are probably votes for weakness. You have a choice right now. You can continue making unconscious choices that reinforce weakness. Or you can start making conscious choices that build strength. But you cannot do both. And the first step is recognition. Recognizing that weakness is not something that happened to you. Weakness is something you built, something you created, something you reinforced through thousands of choices. And if you built it, you can destroy it. But first you have to see it clearly. So here's what you do tonight. Before you sleep, you review your day. How many times did you choose weakness? Be honest. Be brutal. Count them. The snooze, the skipped workout, the avoided conversation, the chosen distraction, the broken promise to yourself. Count them all. And then ask yourself this question. If I continue making this number of weak choices every day, where will I be in 1 year? 5 years? 10 years? The answer to that question is your future if nothing changes. And that future is probably not the one you want. So tomorrow, you start choosing differently. Not perfectly, not all at once. Just one more choice for strength than you made today. One less excuse. One more follow-through. One more vote for the strong version of yourself. That is all. Just one more. Because strength is not built through one massive transformation. Strength is built through one choice at a time. One moment where you choose strength instead of weakness. One morning where you get up instead of hitting snooze. One workout where you train instead of skipping. One difficult conversation where you speak instead of staying silent. One task where you focus instead of distracting. One more choice. One more vote. One more step away from weakness and toward strength. Your weakness is not permanent. Your weakness is not who you are. Your weakness is a habit built through thousands of choices. And habits can be broken. Identities can be rebuilt. Weakness can be destroyed. But only if you stop pretending it is something beyond your control. Only if you accept that weakness is a choice you have been making. Only if you take responsibility for the choices that created the weak version of yourself. Only then can you start making the choices that create the strong version. You recognize that weakness is a choice. Now, let's talk about what actually builds strength when motivation fails. Chapter 2. Discipline is not motivation. It is a system. You are waiting for motivation, waiting to feel inspired, waiting for the day when you wake up excited to do the work, waiting for the moment when discipline feels easy instead of hard. And while you wait, nothing changes. While you wait, weakness continues. While you wait, another day passes where you did nothing because you did not feel like doing anything. And that waiting is destroying you. Because motivation is not coming. Motivation is not reliable. Motivation is not what builds strength. Discipline is what builds strength. And discipline is not a feeling. Discipline is a system. Here is what you need to understand. Motivation is an emotional state that fluctuates with circumstances, energy levels, and mood. Some days you feel motivated. Most days you do not. Some mornings you wake up ready to conquer. Most mornings you wake up wanting to stay in bed. Motivation comes and goes. It rises and falls. It appears and disappears. And if you're waiting for motivation to take action, you will take action occasionally. And occasional action produces occasional results, which means no real results at all. That is the key. Why motivation always fails and discipline always works. Motivation fails because it is unreliable. You cannot count on feeling motivated. You cannot schedule motivation. You cannot guarantee motivation will be there when you need it. So if your action depends on motivation, your action is unpredictable. Your training happens when you feel like it. Your work happens when you are inspired. Your follow-through happens when motivation is high. And the rest of the time, nothing happens. But discipline is different. Discipline does not depend on how you feel. Discipline is a system of non-negotiable standards that execute regardless of mood, energy, or circumstances. You train not because you feel motivated. You train because training happens at this time on these days. Period. You work not because you feel inspired. You work because work happens during these hours. Period. You follow through not because you want to. You follow through because you said you would. Period. You have a choice. You can continue depending on motivation and remain at the mercy of fluctuating emotional states. Or you can build disciplined systems that execute regardless of how you feel. But you cannot do both. And right now, your dependence on motivation is why your results are inconsistent, your progress is sporadic, and your strength is non-existent. Think about your current approach. You decide you want to get in shape. You feel motivated. You train for 3 days. Then motivation fades. You stop training. Weeks pass. You feel motivated again. You train for 2 days. Motivation disappears. You stop. This cycle repeats endlessly. And at the end of the year, you are in exactly the same shape you started because motivation-driven action is not sustainable. It is not consistent. It is not discipline. Here is the problem. You have been taught that motivation is required. You have been sold the idea that you need to feel excited to take action. You have been conditioned to believe that discipline should feel good. But that is a lie. That is marketing. That is motivational speakers selling you feelings instead of systems. Because feelings sell. Systems do not. Feelings are exciting. Systems are boring. Feelings make you buy the course. Systems make you do the work. But you do not need feelings. You need systems. You need standards that do not negotiate. You need protocols that execute automatically. You need decisions that were made once and are now closed. That is discipline. That is what works when motivation fails. That is what builds strength when feelings fade. It is not about never feeling motivated. It is not about pretending emotions do not exist. It is about building systems that work regardless of emotional state. About creating structures that execute whether you feel like it or not. About making discipline systematic instead of motivational. And that requires a different approach than what you have been using. Here is how to build the decision-making system that eliminates choice. The strong do not decide every morning whether to train. They decided once that training happens Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 6 a.m. That decision is closed. It is not reopened for debate every morning. It is not reconsidered when they feel tired. It is not negotiated when they do not feel like it. The decision was made. The system is installed, and the system executes. That is the key. Decide once. Execute always. You do not decide daily whether to follow through. You decided once what your standards are, and now you follow those standards without daily reconsideration. Because every time you reopen the decision, you create opportunity for weakness. Every time you reconsider your commitment, you invite negotiation. Every time you debate whether to follow through, you waste willpower. And wasted willpower is why motivation-dependent people fail. So you close the decision. You decide once what happens and when it happens. Training happens these days at this time. Work happens during these hours using this protocol. Sleep happens at this time after this routine. Food follows these guidelines with these exceptions. Whatever your standards are, you define them once, clearly, specifically, and then you close the decision. No more debate. No more reconsideration. No more negotiation. The decision is made. Now you execute. You have a choice right now. Continue reopening decisions every day and wasting energy on negotiation. Or decide once what your standards are and close the decision permanently. One approach exhausts you through constant choice. The other approach frees you through systematic execution. Here is the protocol. Tonight, you define 3 non-negotiable standards. Not 10, not 20. 3 standards you will follow regardless of how you feel. Maybe it is wake time. Maybe it is training schedule. Maybe it is work hours. Whatever 3 standards matter most to your transformation. You write them down. You make them specific. And you commit to following them for 30 days without negotiation. Not 29 days. 30. Because 30 days of non-negotiable execution rewires your brain. 30 days proves the system works. 30 days builds the habit of following through regardless of motivation. And 30 days is long enough that you will face every excuse, every low motivation day, every circumstance that used to make you quit, and you will follow through anyway. Because the decision is closed. That is discipline. That is the system. That is what works when motivation fails. 3 non-negotiable standards. Defined once. Executed for 30 days. No exceptions. No negotiations. No reopening the decision. Just execution. Here are the 3 pillars of sustainable discipline. First, non-negotiable standards. These are boundaries you never cross. Lines you never blur. Standards you never lower. Not flexible guidelines. Not suggestions you follow when convenient. Non-negotiable standards that define who you are. You are someone who wakes at this time. You're someone who trains on these days. You're someone who keeps their word. Not someone who tries. Someone who does. Second, identity-based habits. You do not train because you want results. You train because you are someone who trains. You do not work hard because you need success. You work hard because you are someone who works hard. You do not keep promises because it benefits you. You keep promises because you're someone who keeps promises. The action flows from identity. And identity is built through consistent action. That is the loop. That is the system. Third, environmental design. You make the right choices easier than the wrong choices. You remove friction from good behaviors and add friction to bad behaviors. Workout, clothes laid out. Healthy food prepped. Work materials ready. Distractions behind barriers. Phone in another room. Junk food not in the house. You design your environment so that following through is the path of least resistance. So that weakness requires effort and strength is automatic. That is the key. Sustainable discipline is not about willpower. Sustainable discipline is about systems. Non-negotiable standards that define you. Identity-based habits that flow from who you are. Environmental design that makes discipline automatic. Build these 3 pillars, and discipline stops being something you force. Discipline becomes something you are. You have a choice. Try to discipline yourself through willpower and motivation. Or start building systems that make discipline systematic. One approach works occasionally when conditions are perfect. The other approach works consistently regardless of conditions. One depends on feeling motivated. The other executes whether you feel motivated or not. Most people will never build these systems. Most people will continue depending on motivation. They will feel inspired, take action for a few days, lose motivation, stop taking action, wait for motivation to return, repeat this cycle endlessly. And they will wonder why they never transform. They never transform because transformation requires consistency. And consistency requires discipline. And discipline requires systems. Not motivation. Systems. But you're not most people. You understand that motivation is unreliable. You understand that feelings fluctuate. You understand that waiting for motivation is waiting forever. So you build systems instead. You define non-negotiable standards. You build identity-based habits. You design your environment. And you execute regardless of how you feel. That is discipline. That is the system. That is what destroys weakness. Your transformation does not start when you feel motivated. Your transformation starts when you build systems that execute without motivation. When you stop waiting for feelings and start following standards. When you close the decision and execute the system. That is where strength begins. That is where weakness ends. You learn that weakness is a choice. Now you learn that discipline is a system. 2 truths that change everything. You stopped waiting for motivation. Now let us talk about the pattern that actually builds results. Chapter 3. Consistency beats intensity every time. You are obsessed with intensity. You want the extreme workout. You want the all-nighter that finishes the project. You want the massive effort that produces instant transformation. You want to go all in, give everything, burn out completely in pursuit of your goal. And that obsession with intensity is why you keep failing. Because intensity is not what builds strength. Consistency is what builds strength. And consistency is the exact opposite of intensity. Here is what you need to understand. People who go all in with maximum effort for 3 days and then quit achieve less than people who show up with moderate effort every day for 3 months. Always, without exception, the intense burst followed by collapse produces 0 results. The boring, repetitive, daily action produces transformation. But you do not want to hear that. You want the dramatic story. You want the heroic effort. You want the intensity that feels like progress, even when it produces nothing. That is the key. The intensity trap that destroys progress. Intensity feels productive. Intensity feels like commitment. Intensity feels like you are finally serious about transformation. So you train for 3 hours. You work until exhaustion. You push yourself to maximum capacity. And it feels good. It feels like you're doing something significant. But you're not doing something significant. You're setting yourself up to quit. Because intensity is not sustainable. You cannot train 3 hours daily. You cannot work until exhaustion every day. You cannot maintain maximum capacity indefinitely. Intensity burns you out. Intensity creates injury. Intensity makes you hate the process. And when you burn out, when you injure yourself, when you start hating the process, you quit. And quitting produces 0 results. 0 results from intense effort is still 0. You have a choice. You can continue chasing intensity and repeating the cycle of burst and collapse. Or you can start building consistency and producing actual results. But you cannot do both. And right now, your addiction to intensity is preventing you from developing the boring consistency that would actually transform you. Think about your pattern. You decide to transform. You feel motivated. You go all in. Maximum effort. Extreme commitment. Total intensity. Day 1 is epic. Day 2 is heroic. Day 3 is exhausting. Day 4 is painful. Day 5 you're injured, depleted, hating the process. Day 6 you quit. And then you wait until motivation returns. And when motivation returns, you repeat the exact same pattern. Intensity, burnout, quit, repeat. That is your cycle. That is why you never transform. Here is the problem. You think intensity is commitment. You think going all in proves you are serious. You think maximum effort is what winners do. But intensity is not commitment. Intensity is often just procrastination disguised as action. It is the burst of effort that allows you to avoid building the boring, unglamorous consistency that actually produces results. It is the dramatic story you tell yourself so you can feel like you're doing something without actually doing the thing that works. Because the thing that works is not dramatic. The thing that works is boring. The thing that works is showing up every single day with moderate effort. Not maximum effort. Moderate effort. Sustainable effort. Effort you can repeat tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. For weeks. For months. For years. That is what works. That is what builds transformation. But that is not what you want to do. Because boring does not feel significant. It is not about never working hard. It is not about never pushing yourself. It is about understanding that one intense day is worth less than 30 consistent days. That 3 hours once is worth less than 30 minutes daily. That maximum effort occasionally produces less than moderate effort consistently. That intensity is the enemy of consistency. And consistency is what produces results. Here is why small daily actions compound into massive results. 1 push-up per day seems pointless, laughably insignificant, not worth doing. But 1 push-up per day is 365 push-ups in a year. 365 push-ups in a year is more than zero. More than the person who trained intensely for 3 days and quit. More than the person who did 3 hours once and never again. 365 beats zero. Every single time. 1 page read daily seems meaningless. 1 page does not teach you anything. 1 page does not make you educated. But 1 page daily is 365 pages in a year. 365 pages is 12 books. 12 books in a year is 12 more books than the person who planned to read intensely and never started. 12 more books than the person who tried to read for 6 hours straight and burned out. 12 beats zero. 1 uncomfortable conversation weekly seems insufficient. 1 conversation does not master communication. But 1 uncomfortable conversation weekly is 52 conversations in a year. 52 difficult conversations is mastery. 52 is more than the person who tried to have 10 difficult conversations in 1 day and quit after 2. 52 beats zero. Always. That is the key. Small daily actions compound. They accumulate. They build. Not immediately. Not visibly, not in ways you notice day to day, but over weeks and months and years, small daily actions compound into massive results. While intensity produces nothing because intensity cannot be sustained, and unsustainable effort always returns to zero. You have a choice. Continue chasing intensity and producing zero, or start building consistency and producing results. 1 approach feels significant. The other approach is significant. 1 makes you feel like you're doing something. The other makes you become something. Here is the protocol. You identify the minimum viable action, the smallest version of the behavior that still counts. Not the ideal version, not the impressive version, the minimum version. For training, maybe it is 10 minutes. For work, maybe it is 1 focused hour. For reading, maybe it is 1 page. For writing, maybe it is 100 words. Whatever the goal, identify the absolute minimum that still moves you forward. And then you commit to that minimum. Not the maximum, not the impressive amount. The minimum. Every single day. No exceptions. On high-energy days, you could do more. On low-energy days, you do the minimum. But you never do zero, because zero breaks the streak. Zero breaks the identity. Zero votes for weakness. The minimum keeps the streak alive. The minimum reinforces identity. The minimum votes for strength. That is the key. The minimum viable action prevents 0 days. 0 days are the enemy. 0 days are where consistency dies. 0 days are where you prove to yourself that your commitment is optional, that your standards are negotiable, that you are someone who quits when things get hard. 0 days destroy identity. 0 days vote for weakness. 0 days must be eliminated. But the minimum viable action prevents 0 days. On days when you're exhausted, sick, traveling, overwhelmed, you do not do the ideal workout. You do 10 minutes. You do not write the full chapter. You write 100 words. You do not complete the full routine. You do the minimum. And that minimum keeps the streak alive. That minimum reinforces that you are someone who follows through. That minimum votes for the identity you're building. Most people will reject this. Most people will say the minimum is not worth doing. That 10 minutes of training is pointless. That 1 page of reading is meaningless. That 100 words of writing accomplishes nothing. And they are right. 1 day of minimum effort accomplishes almost nothing. But 365 days of minimum effort accomplishes everything. 365 days beats 3 days of intensity. Every time, you have a choice right now. There's a goal you keep approaching with intensity and abandoning in burnout. Identify the minimum viable action for that goal, not the impressive action, the minimum, and commit to that minimum for 30 days. Every single day, no exceptions, no 0 days, just the minimum. And watch what happens. Here's what happens. The first week feels too easy. You'll want to do more. Resist that urge. Stick to the minimum. The second week feels boring. You will want to quit because it does not feel significant. Resist that urge. Keep the streak. The third week you will face a low-energy day, a day where you do not want to do anything, and you will do the minimum anyway, because the decision is closed. The fourth week something shifts. The minimum becomes automatic. The consistency becomes identity. You become someone who does not quit, and by day 30, you'll have 30 consecutive days of action. 30 days is more than 99% of people who started with intensity and quit after 3 days. 30 days is the foundation for 60 days. 60 days becomes 90 days. 90 days becomes 1 year. And 1 year of daily minimum viable action produces transformation that 1 year of sporadic intensity never could. Your strength is not built through heroic bursts of intensity. Your strength is built through boring, repetitive, daily consistency. Through showing up when nothing changes. Through doing the minimum when you do not feel like doing anything. Through keeping the streak alive when the streak feels pointless. That is where discipline destroys weakness. Not in the dramatic moment. In the boring daily repetition that compounds into transformation. You learn that weakness is a choice. You learn that discipline is a system. Now you learn that consistency beats intensity. 3 truths, 3 protocols, 3 ways weakness is destroyed. You chose consistency over intensity. Now let us talk about the invisible force that controls your behavior. Chapter 4. Your environment is controlling you. You think you are in control. You think your behavior is determined by your choices, your discipline, your willpower. But you are wrong. Your environment is controlling you. The room you are in right now is shaping your behavior. The people around you are influencing your decisions. The objects within reach are determining your actions. And you do not even notice it happening, because environmental control is invisible. It operates below conscious awareness, and it is destroying your discipline. Here is what you need to understand. Willpower is a finite resource that gets depleted through constant decision-making. Every choice you make drains a little willpower. Every temptation you resist costs energy. Every decision you deliberate exhausts you. And if your environment constantly presents temptation, constantly demands decisions, constantly creates friction for good behaviors, you will eventually fail. Not because you are weak, because willpower runs out. And when willpower runs out, environment wins. That is the key. Your surroundings determine your behavior. If junk food is on the counter, you'll eat junk food. If your phone is next to your bed, you'll check your phone. If the TV is in front of your workspace, you will watch TV. If lazy people surround you, you will become lazy. Not because you decided to, because environment shapes behavior automatically. And most people try to fight their environment through willpower instead of redesigning the environment to make discipline automatic. You have a choice. You can continue fighting your environment and losing the battle, or you can start controlling your environment and making discipline effortless. But you cannot do both. And right now, your environment is sabotaging every attempt at discipline because you have never designed it for success. Think about your current environment. Look around. What do you see? If you see junk food within reach, that environment is designed for eating junk food. If you see your phone immediately accessible, that environment is designed for distraction. If you see a comfortable couch and a TV, that environment is designed for laziness. Your environment is not neutral. Your environment is designed. The only question is whether you designed it deliberately for discipline or whether it evolved randomly toward comfort. Here is the problem. Most people never think about environmental design. They just live in whatever space they happen to occupy. They keep junk food in the house because it tastes good. They keep their phone next to the bed because it is convenient. They set up their workspace facing the TV because that is where the desk fits. And then they wonder why they cannot maintain discipline. They cannot maintain discipline because their environment is fighting against them every moment of every day. It is not about willpower. It is not about being stronger. It is about recognizing that you're trying to build discipline in an environment designed for comfort. You're trying to focus in an environment optimized for distraction. You're trying to eat healthy in an environment filled with junk food. And that is not a willpower problem. That is a design problem. And design problems require design solutions. Here is the solution: strategic friction and flow. You make bad behaviors require more steps, while making good behaviors require fewer steps. You add friction to what you want to stop. You remove friction from what you want to start. You design your environment so that the path of least resistance leads to discipline instead of weakness. Phone addiction? Add friction. Phone goes in another room. Phone stays in a drawer. Phone requires unlocking a box to access. Every barrier you add between you and the phone makes phone use less automatic, less convenient, less likely. The friction protects you from the default behavior. The friction gives willpower a chance to engage before habit takes over. Junk food problem? Add friction. Junk food is not in the house. If you want junk food, you have to leave, drive to the store, buy it, bring it home. That friction is enough to break the automatic reach for junk. That delay is enough to engage the conscious mind. That inconvenience is enough to make the healthy choice easier than the unhealthy choice. Workout resistance? Remove friction. Workout clothes are laid out the night before. Gym bag is packed. Shoes are by the door. Everything is ready. No decisions. No preparation. No barriers between decision and execution. When the time comes, you are already dressed. You're already equipped. You're already moving. The removal of friction makes discipline automatic. Distraction during work? Add friction. Close unnecessary tabs. Turn off notifications. Put phone in another room. Use website blockers. Create physical barriers. Make distraction inconvenient. Make focus the default. Design the workspace so that doing the work is easier than avoiding the work. That is the key. Strategic friction and flow. Add friction to bad behaviors. Remove friction from good behaviors. Design your environment so that discipline is the path of least resistance. And when discipline is the path of least resistance, you do not need willpower. You just need design. You have a choice right now. Continue trying to fight your environment through willpower, or start redesigning your environment to make discipline automatic. One approach exhausts you daily. The other approach supports you automatically. One depends on constant willpower. The other makes willpower unnecessary. Here is the protocol. Tonight, you audit your environment. You look at every space you occupy regularly. Bedroom, kitchen, workspace, living room, car, and you identify what behaviors each space is designed for. Is your bedroom designed for sleep or for phone scrolling? Is your kitchen designed for healthy eating or for snacking? Is your workspace designed for focus or for distraction? Be honest. Be brutal. Your environment is telling you the truth about what behaviors it supports. And if your environment supports the wrong behaviors, you need to redesign it. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Move the phone out of the bedroom. Remove the junk food from the kitchen. Rearrange the workspace to eliminate distractions. Lay out tomorrow's workout clothes. Prepare tomorrow's healthy meals. Remove every barrier to good behavior. Add barriers to bad behavior. Most people will not do this. Most people will say they cannot control their environment. They live with others. They rent. They have limitations. And all of those excuses are just excuses. You can control more of your environment than you think. You can move your phone. You cannot buy junk food. You can rearrange furniture. You can create barriers. You control more than you admit. And the parts you cannot control are probably smaller than the parts you refuse to control. Here is what happens when you design your environment for discipline. Discipline becomes easier. Not easy, easier. Because you are no longer fighting your surroundings every moment of every day. Because the path of least resistance leads toward your goals instead of away from them. Because good behaviors are automatic and bad behaviors require effort. And that design advantage makes consistency possible, makes discipline sustainable, makes transformation inevitable. But environmental design is only part of the equation. Because you're not just shaped by physical environment. You are shaped by social environment, by the people around you, by the influences you absorb, by the standards you're exposed to. And that social environment is probably destroying you just as effectively as your physical environment. Here is why you become the average of your environment. The 5 people you spend most time with determine your standards, your beliefs, your behaviors. Not through conscious teaching, through osmosis, through modeling, through normalization. If those 5 people are lazy, lazy becomes normal. If those 5 people make excuses, excuses become normal. If those 5 people have low standards become normal. And normal becomes you. You do not choose this consciously. You absorb it unconsciously. Their language becomes your language. Their habits become your habits. Their standards become your standards. And if their standards are low, your standards become low. Not because you decided to lower your standards, because you absorb the standards of your environment, and you become what you absorb. You have a choice. Continue absorbing the standards of a weak environment, or start curating a strong environment. One approach makes you average of the people around you. The other approach makes you exceptional by surrounding yourself with exceptional standards. One happens passively. The other requires active design. Here is the protocol. Audit your social environment. List the 5 people you spend most time with. For each person, ask, does this person raise my standards or lower them? Does this person inspire discipline or enable weakness? Does this person challenge me to grow or encourage me to stay comfortable? Be honest. Be brutal. Some people you love are lowering your standards. Some relationships are making you weaker. And then you make hard decisions. You do not need to cut people out completely, but you need to manage exposure. Reduce time with people who lower your standards. Increase time with people who raise them. Seek out people who are stronger, more disciplined, more committed than you. People whose standards make you uncomfortable. People whose habits make yours look weak. People whose discipline exposes your excuses. Those people raise your average. Those people pull you up. Your environment is either supporting your transformation or sabotaging it. Your physical space is either designed for discipline or designed for comfort. Your social circle is either raising your standards or lowering them. And you cannot transform in an environment designed to keep you weak. You cannot build discipline in a space optimized for distraction. You cannot raise your standards while surrounded by people with low standards. The environment wins. Always. You learn that weakness is a choice. You learned that discipline is a system. You learned that consistency beats intensity. Now you learned that environment controls behavior. 4 truths that destroy weakness. You redesigned your environment. Now let us talk about the internal battle that drains your power. Chapter 5. Stop negotiating with yourself. You are negotiating. Right now, in your head, you are debating whether to follow through, whether to keep your commitment, whether to maintain your standard, whether to do what you said you would do. And that negotiation is destroying you. Because every moment you spend debating with yourself is a moment you are not executing. Every second you spend reconsidering is a second you are reinforcing the habit of compromise. Every negotiation is practice at being weak. And you have been practicing for so long that negotiation has become your default response to every commitment you make. Here is what you need to understand. The internal negotiation that kills discipline happens constantly. Every morning when the alarm sounds, you negotiate whether to get up. Every workout time that arrives, you negotiate whether to train. Every work session that begins, you negotiate whether to focus. Every difficult task that appears, you negotiate whether to start. And that constant negotiation drains willpower faster than any other activity. Because negotiation is decision-making. And decision-making exhausts you. That is the key. Every time you negotiate with yourself, you spend willpower. Willpower you need for execution. Willpower you need for discipline. Willpower you need for following through. But you are burning that willpower in endless internal debates about whether you will do what you already decided to do. And by the time the negotiation ends, you are too exhausted to execute. So you compromise. You delay. You quit. And you call it being reasonable when it is actually just being weak. You have a choice. You can continue negotiating with yourself and remain exhausted by constant internal debate. Or you can eliminate negotiation by making your standards non-negotiable. But you cannot do both. And right now, your habit of constant negotiation is preventing you from building any real discipline. Think about this morning. The alarm went off. What happened next? If you're like most people, negotiations started immediately. Maybe I need more sleep. Maybe today is not important. Maybe I can get up later and still be productive. Maybe this one time does not matter. That negotiation probably lasted seconds or minutes. And during that negotiation, you were not getting up. You were debating. You were reconsidering. You were negotiating away your commitment. And here's the problem. That negotiation was never necessary. You already decided when to wake up. You set the alarm. You made the commitment. The decision was made yesterday, or last week, or whenever you establish your wake time. So this morning's negotiation was not making a decision. This morning's negotiation was reconsidering a decision that was already made. And reconsidering decisions is what weak people do. It is not about being rigid. It is not about never adjusting. It is about recognizing that most negotiation is not legitimate reconsideration. Most negotiation is just your brain trying to avoid discomfort. Your brain does not want to get up. So your brain generates reasons why getting up might not be necessary. Your brain does not want to train. So your brain produces justifications for skipping. Your brain does not want to work. So your brain creates excuses for delay. And all of those reasons and justifications and excuses are just negotiation. Just your brain trying to convince you to choose comfort over discipline. Here is how to eliminate the gap between decision and execution. The strong do not deliberate. They execute immediately. The moment the alarm sounds, they are moving, not thinking, not reconsidering, not negotiating, moving. The moment training time arrives, they are already dressed, not debating, not questioning, not negotiating, already executing. The moment work time begins, they're already focused, not deciding whether to focus. Already focused. That is the difference. The strong close the gap between stimulus and response. The gap between decision and execution. The gap where negotiation happens. They close that gap to zero, and in doing so, they eliminate negotiation entirely. Because if there is no gap, there is no space for negotiation. If execution is immediate, there is no time to reconsider. If the response is automatic, there is no opportunity to debate. You have a choice. Continue leaving a gap where negotiation happens, or start closing the gap so negotiation cannot occur. One approach gives weakness space to operate. The other approach eliminates that space entirely. One allows negotiation. The other makes negotiation impossible through immediate execution. Here is the protocol. The 5-second rule. When a commitment arrives, when a standard requires action, when you know what you should do, you have 5 seconds. 5 seconds to start moving. 5 seconds to begin executing. 5 seconds before negotiation starts. Because negotiation takes time. Negotiation requires thought. Negotiation needs space. And if you move within 5 seconds, you eliminate the space where negotiation occurs. Alarm sounds. 5 seconds to feet on the floor. Not 5 seconds to start thinking about getting up. 5 seconds to actually be standing. No thought. No reconsideration. No negotiation. Just movement. Training time arrives. 5 seconds to be in workout clothes. Not 5 seconds to decide whether to train. 5 seconds to already be dressed and moving. Work time begins. 5 seconds to be at desk with first task started. Not 5 seconds to consider whether to work. 5 seconds to already be working. That is the key. The 5-second rule collapses the gap. Eliminates the space where negotiation happens. Forces immediate execution before your brain can generate reasons to delay. And immediate execution becomes the pattern, becomes the habit, becomes who you are. Someone who does not negotiate. Someone who executes immediately. Someone who follows through without internal debate. Most people will resist this. Most people will say they need to think. They need to consider their energy levels. They need to assess whether today is the right day. They need to evaluate conditions. And all of that thinking and considering and assessing is just negotiation. Just creating space for weakness to operate. Just giving your brain time to generate excuses. The 5-second rule eliminates that time. Eliminates that space. Eliminates negotiation through immediate action. You have a choice right now. Tomorrow morning, when the alarm sounds, you have 5 seconds. 5 seconds to be standing. Not thinking, standing. And you will discover something. You will discover that once you are standing, once you are moving, once you are executing, the negotiation stops. Because negotiation only happens in the gap. And the gap is closed. But closing the gap is only part of the solution. Because even with immediate execution, even with the 5-second rule, you can still negotiate after you start. You can still reconsider mid-execution. You can still debate whether to continue. And that mid-execution negotiation is what makes most people quit after starting. They begin, then negotiate whether to finish, then compromise by stopping early or reducing intensity or doing less than committed. Here is how to make your standards non-negotiable. You create personal laws, not guidelines, not suggestions, laws, standards that you never break regardless of circumstance, mood, or temptation. These are boundaries that define who you are rather than rules you follow when convenient. And the difference between guidelines and laws is the difference between someone who sometimes follows through and someone who always follows through. A guideline says I try to wake up at 5. A law says I wake at 5. A guideline says I usually train on these days. A law says I train on these days. A guideline says I generally avoid junk food. A law says I do not eat junk food. Guidelines are negotiable. Laws are not. Guidelines are what you do when motivated. Laws are who you are. That is the key. Non-negotiable standards eliminate negotiation by making the discussion irrelevant. You do not negotiate about laws. You do not debate about who you are. You do not reconsider your identity. The standard exists. You follow it. End of discussion. No negotiation. No debate. No reconsideration. The law is the law, and you follow the law because that is who you are. You have a choice. Continue treating your standards as negotiable guidelines, or start treating them as non-negotiable laws. One approach leaves room for weakness. The other approach eliminates weakness through absolute clarity. One creates constant internal debate. The other creates absolute certainty. One exhausts you through negotiation. The other frees you through non-negotiation. Here is the protocol. Tonight, you identify 3 standards that will become non-negotiable laws. Not 50. 3. Standards important enough to define who you are. Maybe wake time. Maybe training schedule. Maybe work hours. Whatever 3 standards matter most to your transformation. And you declare them as laws. Not try. Not usually. Not generally. Laws. I wake at this time. I train on these days. I work during these hours. Period. No exceptions. No negotiation. No debate. And tomorrow, when those standards are tested, when circumstances make them inconvenient, when your mood makes them unappealing, when your brain generates reasons to negotiate, you do not negotiate. You remember that the standard is a law, and laws are not negotiable. The decision was made. The standard is closed. You execute, not because you feel like it, because that is who you are. Most people will fail at this. Most people will make standards and then immediately start negotiating exceptions. This one time is different. These circumstances are special. This situation warrants flexibility. And every exception is proof that the standard was never a law. It was always a guideline. And guidelines do not transform people. Laws transform people. Non-negotiable enforcement transforms people. And you only get non-negotiable enforcement when you stop negotiating. Your discipline dies in negotiation. Your weakness is born in the gap between decision and execution. Your transformation is destroyed by the constant internal debate about whether you will do what you said you would do. Stop debating. Stop reconsidering. Stop negotiating. Decide once. Execute always. Make your standards laws. Close the gap. And watch what happens when negotiation is eliminated. You learn that weakness is a choice. You learn that discipline is a system. You learned that consistency beats intensity. You learned that environment controls behavior. Now you learned that negotiation destroys discipline. 5 truths, 5 protocols, 5 ways weakness is destroyed. You eliminated negotiation. Now let us talk about the cost that most people refuse to pay. Chapter 6. Pain is the currency of transformation. You want transformation without pain. You want strength without suffering. You want discipline without discomfort. You want to become someone powerful while feeling comfortable the entire journey. And that desire is why you never transform. Because transformation has a price. And that price is always paid in pain. Not sometimes. Not occasionally. Always. And until you accept that pain is the currency of transformation, you will continue avoiding the very thing that would actually change you. Here is what you need to understand. All growth requires discomfort. Not might require. Not sometimes requires. Always requires. There is no version of transformation that does not include sustained discomfort. Physical, emotional, psychological. The discomfort of training when your body wants rest. The discomfort of discipline when your mind wants ease. The discomfort of growth when everything in you wants to stay the same. That discomfort is not optional. That discomfort is not negotiable. That discomfort is the price. And the price must be paid. That is the key. Your willingness to tolerate discomfort determines your ceiling for achievement. Show me someone who avoids all pain, and I will show you someone who achieves nothing. Show me someone who embraces productive pain, and I will show you someone who transforms completely. The difference is not talent, not genetics, not luck. The difference is willingness to pay the price. And the price is pain. You have a choice. You can continue trying to find the painless path to transformation, or you can accept that pain is required and start paying the price. But you cannot do both. And right now, your avoidance of pain is keeping you weak, comfortable, and exactly the same as you have always been. Think about what you want, really want: the body, the business, the discipline, the life. Now ask yourself honestly, are you willing to be uncomfortable every day for the next year to get it? Not occasionally uncomfortable, daily uncomfortable, sustained discomfort, for months, for years. Are you willing to pay that price? If the answer is no, you do not actually want transformation. You want the idea of transformation. You want the result without the process. You want the destination without the journey. And that is fine. That is honest. But stop pretending you want transformation when what you actually want is comfort. Because you cannot have both. You get comfort or you get transformation. Choose one. Here is the problem. You have been trying to find a shortcut, the hack, the method that makes transformation easy, the program that produces results without pain, the system that lets you transform while staying comfortable. And you keep failing, not because you are incapable, because you're searching for something that does not exist. There is no painless transformation. There is no comfortable growth. There is no easy discipline. Pain is the price, and the price is non-negotiable. It is not about enjoying pain. It is not about being masochistic. It is about understanding that pain is the currency and transformation is what that currency buys. You do not have to like paying. You just have to pay. You do not have to enjoy discomfort. You just have to tolerate it long enough for the transformation to occur. And most people are not willing to do that. Most people quit the moment sustained discomfort begins. And that is why most people never transform. Here is why avoiding pain guarantees you stay weak. Every time you choose comfort over discomfort, easy over difficult, pleasant over challenging, you are voting for weakness. You are reinforcing the identity of someone who avoids hard things. You are practicing the habit of choosing comfort. And that practice makes you weaker, not just in that moment, in every moment. Because every choice for comfort is practice at being someone who chooses comfort. And someone who always chooses comfort is someone who never transforms. The math is simple. Choose comfort consistently and become comfortable. Choose discomfort consistently and become strong. You become what you practice. You become what you choose. You become the sum of your responses to discomfort. If your response is always avoid, you become someone who avoids. If your response is always embrace, you become someone who embraces. And only the people who embrace discomfort transform. Everyone else stays exactly where they are. You have a choice. Continue choosing comfort and accept that you will remain weak. Or start choosing discomfort and begin the transformation. One feels better today. The other creates better tomorrow. One maintains weakness. The other destroys weakness. One is what you have been doing. The other is what you need to start doing. Here is the protocol for embracing productive pain. First, you distinguish between productive pain and destructive pain. Not all pain serves growth. Injury is different from training discomfort. Toxic relationships are different from growth challenge. Self-destruction is different from discipline. You need to know the difference. Because embracing all pain is stupidity. Embracing productive pain while eliminating destructive pain is wisdom. Productive pain has direction. It is moving you towards something you're building. The burn of muscles being trained. The anxiety of attempting something new. the discomfort of discipline when you want to quit, the frustration of learning a difficult skill. This pain is building you. This pain is creating capacity. This pain is the price of transformation. Embrace it. Seek it. Use it. Destructive pain has no direction. It repeats without progress. The pain of injury from ignoring your body's limits. The pain of toxic relationships you refuse to leave. The pain of self-destructive patterns you keep repeating. This pain is breaking you. This pain is destroying capacity. This pain is not transformation. Eliminate it. Remove it. Stop tolerating it. That is the key. Embrace productive pain. Eliminate destructive pain. Not embrace all pain. That is reckless. Not avoid all pain. That is weak. Embrace the pain that builds. Eliminate the pain that destroys. And knowing the difference is what separates discipline from stupidity. You have a choice right now. There is pain you have been avoiding. Productive pain, the discomfort of training, the anxiety of starting, the challenge of discipline. That pain is the price of transformation, and you have been refusing to pay it. Stop refusing. Start paying. Accept that discomfort is required. Accept that pain is the currency. Accept that transformation costs, and the cost is paid in sustained discomfort. Here is what happens when you embrace productive pain. The pain does not disappear. You just stop being controlled by it. The workout still burns. You just do not quit because it burns. The discipline still feels hard. You just do not compromise because it feels hard. The growth still creates anxiety. You just do not avoid growth because of anxiety. The pain remains. Your relationship with pain changes. And that change is what makes transformation possible. Because when pain no longer stops you, nothing stops you. When discomfort no longer makes you quit, you become unstoppable. When difficulty no longer makes you compromise, you become unbreakable. The pain is still there. You're just no longer controlled by it. You're no longer stopped by it. You're no longer defined by your avoidance of it. And that is the transformation. Not the absence of pain, the transcendence of pain. Most people will never reach this point. Most people will continue avoiding pain their entire lives. They will choose comfort at every opportunity. They will quit the moment sustained discomfort begins. They will organize their entire existence around minimizing pain. And they will die weak, comfortable, and full of regret about who they could have become if they had been willing to be uncomfortable. But you're not most people. You understand that pain is not the enemy. Avoidance of pain is the enemy. You understand that discomfort is not the obstacle. Fear of discomfort is the obstacle. You understand that transformation requires sustained pain, and you are willing to pay that price. Not because you want to suffer, because you want to transform. And transformation costs, and the cost is pain. Here is the protocol. Starting tomorrow, you seek one uncomfortable thing daily. Not massive suffering. Just one choice for discomfort over comfort. Cold shower instead of hot. Difficult workout instead of easy. Challenging task instead of simple. Uncomfortable conversation instead of avoidance. One choice per day where you deliberately choose discomfort. Where you practice paying the price. Where you build the capacity to tolerate pain. And over time, that daily practice compounds. Your tolerance for discomfort increases. Your capacity for sustained pain grows. Your ability to remain disciplined while uncomfortable becomes automatic. And pain stops being the thing that stops you. Pain becomes the thing that proves you. The thing that strengthens you. The thing that transforms you from someone who avoids discomfort into someone who embraces it as the price of becoming powerful. Your transformation will not feel good. Your discipline will not be comfortable. Your growth will not be painless. And that is exactly how you know it is working. Because pain is the currency. Discomfort is the price. And you're finally willing to pay what transformation actually costs. You learned that weakness is a choice. You learned that discipline is a system. You learned that consistency beats intensity. You learned that environment controls behavior. You learned that negotiation destroys discipline. Now you learned that pain is the currency of transformation. 6 truths that destroy weakness. You accepted the price. Now let us talk about what actually builds who you are. Chapter 7. Identity is built through action, not thought. You think you can think your way into a new identity. You think affirmations work. You think visualizing success creates success. You think saying, "I am disciplined," makes you disciplined. But you are wrong. Thinking does not create identity. Wishing does not build character. Affirmations without action create delusion, not transformation. Because identity is not what you claim. Identity is what you consistently do. And until your actions match your words, you're not building a new identity. You are just lying to yourself. Here is what you need to understand. Saying, "I am disciplined," while hitting snooze, skipping workouts, and breaking commitments does not make you disciplined. It makes you delusional. It makes you someone who confuses declaration with demonstration. It makes you someone who thinks words create reality when reality is only created through action. And that confusion is keeping you weak. Because you keep declaring who you want to be instead of doing what that person does. That is the key. Why affirmations without action create delusion. Affirmations feel productive. They feel like you are working on yourself. They feel like transformation is happening. But nothing is happening. You're just talking, just thinking, just claiming an identity your actions do not support. And the gap between what you claim and what you do is the gap where self-respect dies. You have a choice. You can continue affirming an identity your actions contradict. Or you can start building identity through consistent action that proves who you are becoming. But you cannot do both. And right now, your reliance on affirmations is preventing you from doing the actual work that would make those affirmations true. Think about what you claim. I am disciplined. I am strong. I am consistent. I am reliable. Now compare those claims to your actions. Did you wake up when you said you would? Did you train when you said you would? Did you work when you said you would? Did you keep the promises you made to yourself? If not, your actions are contradicting your claims. Your behavior is proving you are not who you say you are. And that contradiction is destroying you. Here is the problem. Your brain believes your actions, not your words. You can tell yourself you're disciplined all day. But if you hit snooze, your brain records that as evidence you're not disciplined. You can affirm you are strong. But if you skip the workout, your brain catalogs that as proof you are weak. You can visualize success. But if you avoid the work, your brain knows you are not someone who succeeds. Actions speak. Words are just noise. And your brain is listening to actions. It is not about never using affirmations. It is not about eliminating positive self-talk. It is about understanding that affirmations only work when they describe actions you're already taking. When your behavior supports the identity you claim. When your daily choices prove the words you speak. Without that behavioral foundation, affirmations are just fantasy, just wishful thinking, just delusion that delays the real work. Here is how identity actually forms. Through the one-vote system. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you're becoming. Wake up on time, 1 vote for disciplined. Hit snooze, 1 vote for weak. Train when scheduled, 1 vote for strong. Skip the workout, 1 vote for lazy. Keep your word, 1 vote for reliable. Break your promise, 1 vote for untrustworthy. Every single action is a vote, and you become whoever gets the most votes. That is the key. Identity is the accumulated votes of your daily actions, not your intentions, not your affirmations, not your visualizations, your actions, the things you actually do. The choices you actually make. The behaviors you actually repeat. Those are the votes that count. And whoever gets the most votes becomes your identity. Right now, if you are honest, weakness is probably winning. Because you are probably voting for weakness more often than strength. You vote for weakness every time you compromise. Every time you negotiate. Every time you choose comfort. Every time you break a promise to yourself. Those votes accumulate. Those votes compound. And eventually those votes determine who you are. You have a choice. Continue voting for weakness and become weak. Or start voting for strength and become strong. But understand this. One vote for strength does not erase 10 votes for weakness. You do not transform through occasional disciplined action. You transform through consistent disciplined action that accumulates enough votes to shift your identity. And that requires more votes for strength than votes for weakness. Every single day, for weeks, for months, until strength has enough votes to become your identity. Here is the protocol. Starting tomorrow, you track your votes. Not formally, not perfectly, just awareness. Every time you face a choice point, you notice which way you voted. Alarm sounds. Did you get up or hit snooze? That is a vote. Workout time arrives. Did you train or skip? That is a vote. Work needs to be done. Did you focus or distract? That is a vote. Promise was made to yourself. Did you keep it or break it? That is a vote. And at the end of the day, you assess. Did strength get more votes than weakness? Did discipline get more votes than compromise? Did the identity you want get more votes than the identity you're trying to leave behind? If yes, today moved you forward. If no, today moved you backward. There is no maintenance. There is no neutral. Every day is either votes for strength or votes for weakness. And the majority determines your trajectory. Most people will not track this. Most people will continue making unconscious choices and wondering why they never change. They will vote for weakness dozens of times per day and never notice. They will claim they're disciplined while their actions prove they are not. They will affirm an identity their behavior contradicts. And they will stay stuck forever because identity does not change through thinking. Identity changes through accumulated action that proves the change is real. But you're not most people. You understand that actions are votes. You understand that votes determine identity. You understand that you become whoever gets the most votes. So you start paying attention. You start noticing which identity is winning each day. And you start shifting your votes toward the identity you want to build. Here is how to become someone you actually respect. Keep the small promises you make to yourself. That is all. That is the entire protocol. You say you will wake at 5. You wake at 5. You say you will train today. You train today. You say you will not eat junk. You do not eat junk. You say you will work for 2 hours. You work for 2 hours. Every kept promise is a vote for someone who keeps promises. Every kept promise builds self-respect. That is the key. Self-respect is earned through demonstrated reliability to yourself, not through affirmations, not through wishes, through keeping your word to yourself, through proving to yourself that when you commit, you follow through, through demonstrating that your promises mean something. And every time you keep a small promise, you deposit self-respect into your identity. Every time you break a small promise, you withdraw self-respect. And self-respect is the foundation of discipline, because you cannot maintain discipline if you do not respect yourself. And you cannot respect yourself if you consistently break promises to yourself. Every broken promise teaches you that your word means nothing, that your commitments are optional, that you're someone who says things and does not follow through. And once you believe that about yourself, discipline becomes impossible. Because discipline requires that you trust yourself to follow through. And you cannot trust someone who constantly breaks their word. You have a choice right now Tonight, make one small promise to yourself, not a massive commitment. One small promise. I will wake at this time. I will do 10 push-ups. I will read 1 page. I will not check my phone for 1 hour. Something specific, something measurable, something you can definitely do. And tomorrow, keep that promise. Not because it matters in isolation, because it is a vote. A vote for someone who keeps promises. A vote for self-respect. A vote for the identity you are building. And then do it again the next day, and the next, and the next. One small promise kept every single day. And over time, those kept promises accumulate. Those votes compound. And your identity shifts from someone who breaks promises to someone who keeps them. From someone who claims discipline to someone who demonstrates discipline. From someone who talks about transformation to someone who is actually transforming. Your identity is not formed through declaration. Your identity is formed through demonstration. Through the daily actions that prove who you are. Through the votes you cast with every choice. Through the promises you keep when no one is watching. That is where identity lives. That is where character forms. That is where transformation actually happens. Not in your thoughts, in your actions. You learn that weakness is a choice. You learn that discipline is a system. You learn that consistency beats intensity. You learn that environment controls behavior. You learned that negotiation destroys discipline. You learned that pain is the currency. Now you learn that identity is built through action. 7 truths that destroy weakness. You built identity through action. Now let us talk about the test most people fail. Chapter 8. Boredom is the test you must pass. You are addicted to excitement, addicted to newness, addicted to the feeling of starting something fresh. You love day 1. You love the motivation of beginning. You love the energy of a new commitment. But you hate day 30. You hate the repetition. You hate the boring middle where nothing feels new and nothing appears to be changing. And that hatred of boredom is why you never finish anything. Because transformation does not happen in the exciting beginning. Transformation happens in the boring middle. And you always quit before you get there. Here is what you need to understand. Most people quit when it stops being exciting. The initial phase of any goal is thrilling. New gym membership feels like transformation. New business feels like success. New commitment feels like change. But that excitement fades. Always. Within days or weeks, the excitement disappears and what remains is boring, repetitive, unglamorous daily work. And that is exactly when most people quit. Not because the goal is impossible, because the goal stopped being exciting. That is the key. You are not failing because the work is too hard. You are failing because the work is too boring. You can handle difficulty. You cannot handle repetition. You can push through challenge. You cannot sit through monotony. You can endure intensity. You cannot tolerate the unglamorous grind of doing the same thing every single day when nothing appears to be changing. Boredom is your enemy. Boredom is what stops you. And until you learn to pass the boredom test, you will never complete anything significant. You have a choice. You can continue chasing excitement and quitting when boredom arrives. Or you can start embracing boredom as the exact phase where transformation happens. But you cannot do both. And right now, your inability to tolerate boredom is preventing you from experiencing any lasting transformation. Think about your pattern. You start something new. Day 1 is exciting. Day 2 is energizing. Day 3, you are still motivated. Day 7, the excitement starts fading. Day 14, it feels routine. Day 21, it is boring. Day 30, you quit and look for something new that feels exciting again. That is your cycle. Start, get bored, quit, repeat. And that cycle guarantees you never transform. Because transformation requires staying past day 30, past day 60, past day 90, into the boring phase where nothing feels new, but everything is compounding. Here is the problem. You have been taught that passion is required, that if something is right for you, it will stay exciting, that if you are on the correct path, you will feel motivated consistently. But that is a lie. That is motivation seller propaganda. That is what keeps you buying new programs and starting over instead of finishing what you started. Because nothing stays exciting. Everything becomes boring if you do it long enough. And the ability to continue when boredom arrives is what separates those who transform from those who dabble. It is not about finding something that never gets boring. It is about becoming someone who does not need excitement to continue. About building the capacity to show up when it is boring. About developing the discipline to execute when nothing feels new. About understanding that boredom is not a signal to quit. Boredom is a signal that you are entering the phase where real transformation begins. Here is the discipline of showing up when nothing changes. Growth is not linear. Growth is not visible daily. You train for weeks, seeing no physical change. Your body looks the same. Your strength feels the same. Nothing appears to be happening, but everything is happening beneath the surface. Adaptation is occurring. Capacity is building. Transformation is compounding. You just cannot see it yet. And if you quit because you cannot see it, you quit right before the results appear. You work for months seeing no business growth. Revenue is flat. Progress is invisible. Nothing seems to be working, but connections are forming. Skills are developing. Systems are improving. And if you continue, breakthrough arrives. But only if you continue through the boring phase where nothing visible is changing. Most people quit in that phase. They quit right before the compounding becomes visible. They quit in the boring middle, and they never discover what happens if you stay. You practice for hours, seeing no skill improvement. You're still bad, still making the same mistakes, still frustrated by your incompetence. Nothing feels like progress, but neural pathways are forming. Muscle memory is building. Understanding is deepening. And if you continue practicing through the boring phase where you still suck, suddenly you do not suck anymore. Suddenly the skill clicks. Suddenly you are competent. But only if you survive boredom first. That is the key. Trust the process during the boring middle when nothing appears to be happening, but everything is compounding beneath the surface. Trust that invisible progress is still progress. Trust that repetition without visible change is still building capacity. Trust that boring is not broken. Boring is working. And if you quit when it gets boring, you quit when it is working. You have a choice. Continue quitting when things get boring, or start trusting the process through the boring phase. One approach keeps you in the exciting beginning forever. The other approach gets you to the transformative end. One feels better moment to moment. The other produces actual results. One is what you have been doing. The other is what you need to start doing. Here is the protocol. Reframe boredom as the crucible. Boredom is not the problem. Boredom is the test. The test that separates those who transform from those who dabble. The test that reveals whether you actually want transformation or just the feeling of starting something new. The test that shows whether you have discipline or just motivation. And most people fail this test. Most people quit the moment it stops feeling exciting. And that is why most people never transform. But you can pass this test, not by making it exciting, by embracing that it is boring, by accepting that transformation requires thousands of repetitions that feel monotonous, by understanding that the people who succeed are not people who found a way to make it exciting. They are people who learn to continue when it is boring, when it is repetitive, when it is unglamorous, when nothing appears to be changing. That is when winners are made. In the boring middle, that losers quit. You have a choice right now. There is something you quit because it got boring. something that stopped being exciting, so you stopped doing it. And you probably told yourself it was not right for you. It was not your passion. It was not working. But the truth is probably simpler. It got boring. You got bored. You quit. Not because it was not working, because it stopped being exciting. And you never learned to continue when excitement fades. Here is what happens when you embrace boredom. You discover that boring means working, that repetitive means building, that unglamorous means compounding, that nothing appearing to change means everything changing beneath the surface. And you stop quitting when things get boring. You stop looking for excitement. You stop needing newness. You just continue, day after boring day, week after boring week, month after boring month. And while everyone else is chasing excitement and starting over, you are finishing, completing, transforming, because you passed the boredom test they failed. Most people will never pass this test. Most people are addicted to the excitement of beginning. They love starting. They hate continuing. They love day 1. They hate day 50. They love feeling motivated. They hate feeling bored. And that preference for excitement over execution is why they collect unfinished projects, abandoned goals, and unrealized potential. They start everything. They finish nothing. Because they quit when boredom arrives. Every single time. But you're not most people. You understand that boredom is not the enemy. Quitting because of boredom is the enemy. You understand that the boring phase is where transformation actually happens. You understand that the ability to continue when nothing feels exciting is the discipline that builds everything worth having. So you stop chasing excitement. You start embracing boredom. You recognize boring as the sign you are in the transformation zone. And you continue. Here is the protocol. Starting tomorrow, when boredom arrives, you do not quit. You notice that you are bored. You acknowledge that nothing feels exciting. And then you continue anyway. Not because it feels good, because boredom is the test. And you're passing the test. One boring day at a time. One repetitive session at a time. One unglamorous choice at a time. You continue through the boring phase that stops everyone else. And that continuation is what makes you different. Your transformation is not hiding in some exciting new approach. Your transformation is waiting in the boring repetition you keep abandoning. In the daily practice you quit because it stopped feeling new. In the unglamorous grind you avoid because it is not exciting. That is where transformation lives. In boredom, in repetition, in the boring middle where most people quit and winners continue. You learn that weakness is a choice. You learn that discipline is a system. You learn that consistency beats intensity. You learned that environment controls behavior. You learned that negotiation destroys discipline. You learned that pain is the currency. You learn that identity is built through action. Now you learn that boredom is the test. 8 truths that destroy weakness. You passed the boredom test. Now, let us talk about what determines everything. Chapter 9. Your standards determine your life. You think your life is the result of bad luck, bad timing, or bad circumstances. But you are wrong. Your life is not random. Your life is not accidental. Your life is the perfect reflection of your standards. Show me your standards, and I will show you your future. Show me what you tolerate, and I will show you what you will become. Show me what you accept, and I will show you where you will end up. Because your life always matches your standards. Always. And if you do not like your life, the problem is not your circumstances. The problem is your standards. Here is what you need to understand. There is a brutal correlation between low standards and low results. Low standards for relationships produce toxic relationships. Low standards for work produce mediocre careers. Low standards for health produce declining bodies. Low standards for discipline produce weak character. Your life is not determined by what you hope for. Your life is determined by what you are willing to tolerate. And right now, you are tolerating things that are destroying you. That is the key. Your life is a perfect reflection of what you have been willing to tolerate. Every toxic relationship you stayed in because leaving was uncomfortable. Every mediocre job you kept because finding better required effort. Every unhealthy habit you maintained because change was hard. Every low standard you accepted because raising standards meant saying no to comfort. All of that toleration created the life you have now. And if you want a different life, you need different standards. You have a choice. You can continue tolerating low standards and accept the life those standards produce. Or you can start raising standards and build the life higher standards create. But you cannot do both. And right now, your tolerance for mediocrity is guaranteeing you will remain mediocre. Think about your current life, your relationships, your work, your health, your discipline, your results. Now ask yourself honestly, what have I been tolerating that created this? What low standards have I been accepting? What mediocrity have I been allowing? Be brutal. Be honest. Because the answer to those questions explains everything about where you are. And changing the answer is how you change where you are going. Here is the problem. You have been tolerating things you should not tolerate. You tolerate disrespect in relationships because being alone feels scary. You tolerate mediocre performance at work because excellence requires more effort. You tolerate declining health because discipline is uncomfortable. You tolerate broken promises to yourself because keeping them is hard. And every toleration lowers your standards. Every acceptance of mediocrity makes mediocrity normal. Every compromise with less than makes less than your life. It is not about being unreasonable. It is not about perfectionism. It is about recognizing that what you tolerate becomes your baseline. What you accept becomes your standard. What you allow becomes your reality. And if you keep tolerating things that do not serve you, you will keep living a life that does not serve you. The correlation is exact. The relationship is direct. Low standards create low life. High standards create high life. Always. Here is how to systematically raise your standards. Standards are not raised through declaration. You cannot just decide to have higher standards and expect life to change. Standards are raised through enforcement. You decide what you will no longer accept, and then you enforce that boundary without exception until the new standard becomes your baseline. Not through talking, through action, through enforcement, through refusing to tolerate what you used to tolerate. You decide you will no longer tolerate disrespect in relationships. That is the decision. But the decision means nothing until you enforce it. Someone disrespects you. You enforce the boundary. You address it. You exit the relationship if it continues. You prove through action that the standard is real. And you do this every single time. No exceptions. No negotiations. No tolerating what you said you would not tolerate. Enforcement is what makes standards real. You decide you will no longer tolerate mediocre work from yourself. That is the decision. But the decision means nothing until you enforce it. You catch yourself doing low-quality work. You stop. You redo it properly. You refuse to submit mediocre output. You enforce the standard every single time. Through action. Through refusal to accept less than your standard. Through demonstrated commitment to the new baseline. You decide you will no longer tolerate unhealthy habits. That is the decision. But the decision means nothing until you enforce it. The unhealthy option appears. You do not take it. You choose the healthy option even when it is harder. You enforce the standard through daily choices that prove the standard is non-negotiable. Not through words. Through demonstrated refusal to tolerate what you decided not to tolerate. That is the key. Enforcement is what raises standards. Not declaration. Enforcement. And enforcement requires that you be willing to make uncomfortable choices, to exit relationships, to have difficult conversations, to do more work, to choose discipline over comfort, to say no to things you used to say yes to. Raising standards is uncomfortable. Raising standards creates temporary disruption. Raising standards requires that you disappoint people who benefited from your low standards. And most people are not willing to do that. So most people keep low standards, and low standards keep them stuck. You have a choice. Continue tolerating low standards to avoid temporary discomfort, or raise standards and accept the temporary disruption that creates permanent strength. One feels easier today. The other creates easier tomorrow. One maintains mediocrity. The other builds excellence. One is what you have been doing. The other is what you need to start doing. Here is the protocol. Tonight, you identify 3 areas where your standards are too low. 3 areas where you have been tolerating things that do not serve you. Maybe relationships, maybe work, maybe health, maybe discipline. Whatever 3 areas are producing results you do not want because your standards in those areas are too low. Write them down. Be specific about what you have been tolerating that you will no longer tolerate. And tomorrow, you begin enforcement, not declaration. Enforcement. Someone crosses the new boundary. You enforce it. You catch yourself compromising the new standard. You correct it. You notice yourself tolerating what you decided not to tolerate. You stop tolerating it. Through action, through demonstrated commitment, through proved enforcement of the new standard. Most people will not do this. Most people will declare new standards and then immediately negotiate exceptions. This one time is different. This situation is special. This person is the exception. And every exception is proof that the standard was never real. It was always just a wish, just a declaration, just words without enforcement. And words without enforcement change nothing. Here is why most people would rather stay comfortable than raise standards. Raising standards means eliminating people, habits, and situations that do not meet the new bar. You raise your relationship standards, and suddenly you need to exit relationships that no longer meet those standards. That is uncomfortable, often lonely, sometimes painful. You raise your work standards, and suddenly you need to do more work, deliver better quality, refuse to accept mediocre output from yourself. That is harder, more demanding, less convenient. You raise your health standards, and suddenly you need to eliminate foods you love, create routines you resist, maintain discipline you find difficult. That is uncomfortable. You raise your discipline standards, and suddenly you need to keep promises you would rather break, follow through when you want to quit, maintain commitments that feel inconvenient. All of that is uncomfortable. All of that creates temporary disruption. And most people are not willing to experience that temporary discomfort even though it creates permanent improvement. You have a choice right now. Accept the temporary discomfort of raising standards, or accept the permanent discomfort of staying stuck with low standards. Both are uncomfortable. One is temporary discomfort that creates strength. The other is permanent discomfort that maintains weakness. Choose which discomfort you prefer, but understand you cannot avoid discomfort. You can only choose which type. Here is what happens when you raise your standards and enforce them. Your life changes. Not immediately, not dramatically, but systematically. The relationships that do not meet your standards end or improve. The work you do reaches higher quality. The health habits that serve you replace the ones that destroy you. The discipline you maintain becomes your baseline instead of your aspiration. And over time, your life reorganizes around your new standards. Your life becomes the reflection of what you refuse to tolerate instead of what you have been accepting. Your life will always match your standards. That is not negotiable. That is not optional. That is mechanics. If your standards are low, your life will be low. If your standards are high, your life will be high. The correlation is perfect. The relationship is exact. And if you want your life to change, your standards must change first. Not your circumstances, not your luck, not your timing, your standards, what you refuse to tolerate, what you will no longer accept, what you enforce without exception. You learn that weakness is a choice. You learn that discipline is a system. You learn that consistency beats intensity. You learned that environment controls behavior. You learn that negotiation destroys discipline. You learn that pain is the currency. You learn that identity is built through action. You learn that boredom is the test. Now you learn that standards determine everything. 9 truths that destroy weakness. You raise your standards. Now, let us bring everything together. Chapter 10. Become someone who cannot be stopped. You have learned 9 truths, 9 protocols, 9 ways that weakness is destroyed. But understanding is not transformation. Knowledge is not discipline. Learning the principles is not the same as becoming the person who lives them. And that is what this final chapter is about. Not learning one more thing. Becoming someone different. Someone unshakable. Someone who cannot be stopped by circumstances, setbacks, or obstacles. Someone whose discipline is not something they practice. Someone whose discipline is who they are. Here is what you need to understand. The final integration of discipline into identity happens when discipline stops being effort and becomes nature. When you no longer decide whether to follow through. When following through is automatic because that is what you do. When discipline is not something you force yourself to maintain. When discipline is simply who you are. That is the transformation point. That is when everything changes. That is when you become unstoppable. That is the key. Discipline is no longer something you practice. Discipline is who you are. You do not decide each morning whether to wake on time. You wake on time because you are someone who wakes on time. You do not negotiate whether to train. You train because you are someone who trains. You do not debate whether to keep your word. You keep your word because you are someone whose word means something. The behavior flows from identity, not from decision. From identity, you have a choice. You can continue practicing discipline as something separate from who you are, or you can integrate discipline so completely that it becomes your identity. But you cannot do both. And right now, discipline is probably still something you force, something you maintain through willpower, something that requires effort. And that means the integration is not complete. The transformation is not finished. You are not yet unshakable. Think about the person you want to become. The disciplined version of yourself. The strong version. The consistent version. The version who follows through without negotiation. What does that person do daily? How does that person respond to obstacles? How does that person handle setbacks? What are that person's non-negotiable standards? You probably know the answers. You know what that person does. The question is whether you're doing those things. Not occasionally, consistently, not when motivated, always. Because you only become that person when you do what that person does until doing what that person does is who you are. Here is the protocol. You close the gap between who you are and who you want to become through consistent action that proves the transformation is real. Not through thinking, not through planning, through action, through daily demonstration that you are becoming the person you decided to become, through accumulated votes that shift your identity from someone who tries to be disciplined to someone who is disciplined. Every morning you wake on time, every scheduled training session you complete, every commitment you keep, every standard you enforce, every negotiation you refuse, every excuse you reject, every choice for strength over weakness. Every single action is proof. Proof to yourself that you are becoming someone different, someone stronger, someone unshakable. And accumulated proof becomes identity, becomes who you are, becomes automatic. That is the key. When discipline is your identity, circumstances cannot shake you. Bad days do not break your routine. Setbacks do not break your commitment. Obstacles do not break your resolve. Because you're not maintaining discipline through willpower. You are expressing discipline through identity. You do not need motivation to be who you are. You just are. And who you are is someone who is disciplined, someone who is strong, someone who follows through, someone who cannot be stopped. You have a choice right now. Continue treating discipline as something you do when you feel like it, or start building discipline as something you are regardless of how you feel. One approach keeps discipline fragile and effort-dependent. The other approach makes discipline automatic and identity-driven. One requires constant willpower. The other operates from identity that no longer requires willpower. One makes you someone who sometimes follows through. The other makes you someone who always follows through. Here is what happens when discipline becomes identity. You stop negotiating, not because you're forcing yourself not to negotiate, because negotiation is not relevant to someone who does not negotiate. You stop making excuses, not because you're suppressing excuses, because you're someone who does not make excuses. You stop breaking promises to yourself, not because you are working hard to keep them, because you're someone who keeps promises. The discipline stops being effort. The discipline becomes expression of who you are. And that is when you become unshakable, where discipline is not dependent on conditions, when your commitment is not fragile, when your standards are not negotiable, when who you are is stronger than what you feel, when your identity is more powerful than your circumstances. That is unshakable. That is unstoppable. That is the person you've been building through every protocol in this book. Here is the protocol for maintaining strength forever. Discipline is not achieved and then abandoned. Discipline is practiced daily for life. Not because it is hard, because that is who you are. You maintain the standards. You follow the systems. You keep the promises. You enforce the boundaries. You continue the consistency. Not until you reach some destination. Forever. Because there is no destination. There is only who you are. And who you are is someone who is disciplined. The daily practices that maintain discipline are the same practices that build discipline. Wake at the committed time. Train on the scheduled days. Work during the designated hours. Keep the promises you make to yourself. Enforce your standards without negotiation. Choose strength over weakness when the choice appears. These are not temporary practices you abandon once you reach some goal. These are permanent practices that define who you are. The weekly reviews that keep you sharp. Every week, you assess. Did I maintain my standards? Did I keep my promises? Did I vote for strength more than weakness? Did I follow through on my commitments? The review is not about judgment. The review is about awareness, about seeing clearly whether you're maintaining the identity you built or sliding back toward the identity you left behind. And awareness allows adjustment before backsliding becomes collapse. The identity reinforcement that keeps you strong. You remind yourself who you are, not through affirmations without action, through recognition of demonstrated identity. I am someone who wakes on time because I woke on time today and yesterday and every day this week. I am someone who trains because I train today and every training day this month. I am someone who keeps promises because I kept every promise I made to myself this week. Recognition of demonstrated identity reinforces that identity, makes it stronger, makes it more permanent. That is the key. The maintenance system prevents backsliding, prevents the gradual erosion that happens when you stop paying attention, prevents the slow compromise that turns temporary discipline into abandoned discipline. Daily practice, weekly review, identity reinforcement. These three maintain what you built. These three keep you sharp. These three ensure that the strength you created through destroying weakness becomes permanent rather than temporary. You have a choice. Build discipline and then abandon it when life gets comfortable. Or build discipline and maintain it through permanent practice. One approach makes discipline temporary. The other approach makes discipline permanent. One creates transformation that fades. The other creates transformation that lasts. One is what most people do. The other is what you will do. Here is the final truth. You're not the same person who started this book. You learn that weakness is a choice. That discipline is a system. That consistency beats intensity. That environment controls behavior. That negotiation destroys discipline. That pain is the currency. That identity is built through action. That boredom is the test. That standards determine everything. And now you learned how to become unshakable, how to integrate discipline into identity, how to maintain strength forever. But learning is not enough. Understanding is not transformation. You must implement. You must practice. You must demonstrate through daily action that you are becoming someone different, someone stronger, someone who cannot be stopped. Not because obstacles disappear, because you stop being stopped by obstacles. Not because discipline becomes easy, because discipline becomes who you are. Not because weakness is gone, because you destroy weakness every single day through choices that vote for strength. Tomorrow morning, the test begins again. The alarm will sound. You'll want to hit snooze. You will want to negotiate. You will want to compromise. And you'll have a choice. Vote for weakness like you used to, or vote for strength like you do now. One choice reinforces who you were. The other choice reinforces who you are becoming. Make the right choice, and then make it again, and again, and again, until the right choice is automatic, until strength is identity, until you are unshakable. You have everything you need, the knowledge, the protocols, the understanding. What you do with it determines everything. Will you implement or just understand? Will you practice or just learn? Will you become someone who cannot be stopped or remain someone who is always stopping themselves? That choice is yours. That choice is today. That choice is every day. Choose strength. Destroy weakness. Become unshakable.